Okay. And here we are on June the 1st, after you hung up on yourself and called me back.
Well, I need to I
You
need
know,
to
I've
be
got.
you dirty rotten bat. Okay, so would you able me to
You are.
share?
You should be able to share on this
Okay,
Monday morning.
all righty,
I'm
here
in a
we
better mood
go.
already now. I was in a shitty mood, but I'm feeling better
Oh,
already. Just like Lady of Spain.
the great Myron Floren. I can play the whole thing if you
Oh,
want.
please don't. Please don't. So you saw the piece on my Facebook page, did you?
I had either completely forgotten that one, or couldn't have remembered. Was that opening day '84?
80.
About the
I had to
first
look
one?
it up. I had to look it up, and I'll reference it quickly now. If you go to my Facebook page, you'll see a report I did in 1980. I believe it was 84 because Pete Rose was in town with.
That's the first, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And Fern Lapierre,
Fernand
Fern
Lapierre,
Lapierre
stop
said,
hitting your table. Your microphone
okay,
is
I'm
stop
sorry.
hitting
Fern
stuff.
Lapierre had a
Stop
cup out
hitting
on his
stuff
organ.
around you. Um,
Fern
yeah.
Fern Lapierre had a cup with money in it at his
Yes.
organ at
That's
Olympic
right. And I
Stadium,
take
and
the
you
money
said,
out. So the whole gag was for me to get him to play Lady of Spain, right? So the first thing I did when I went to the Big O, I went to the management. I said, "Can you put play Lady of Spain on the big marquee?" And they said, "No, no, we're
no.
not going to do
You
that."
see, I thought that would have been my idea, but I already knew you would have tried it, and then they would have had the whole crowd standing,
Or something like that.
singing
That would have been
Lady of Spain as well.
absolutely perfect, but it didn't work out. So I had to kind of make do, and I went to Fernand. I forgot his name. Roland Mayotte will be joining us in a few days. Sportscaster at the time. We worked for Sekas. Anyway, he's the one, and Stuart Nolman too brought it up today. I put Monsieur Lapierre's name back in the description. But I tried to explain to him en français what I was doing, and he wasn't quite sure. He didn't quite connect. So I got that plastic cup, and I got a few dollar bills, and then, of course, he refuses to play Lady of Spain, and I take my tip back, and that's the kicker of the piece. But
Yeah, well,
and
listen, a $2 bill went a long way in those days.
and he rushed his line too. I tried to rehearse him. I was hoping to get a Seinfeldian. Can you play Lady of Spain? No. I was hoping to get that kind of a bit of a pause, and he went straight for the
That one
no.
worked too, though.
He
It
went
worked. It
straight for the
worked.
no.
He
But
was
he's
definite about it.
he's a
Yeah.
darling, and I did another piece with him, and I found it. And I'm gonna post that one too. So Fernand Lapierre, apparently, according to Roland, he's still around. So he must be
My
quite
God. Oh yeah. I mean,
quite old now.
he was the when the Expos were having great teams in those 1980s. He was really, really, really part of the crowd. He wonderful stuff.
But I got
Anyway,
a
for people who don't know, I saw it on It was on the Grumpod site last night, right?
no, it's on my Facebook page, but I will
Your
post it.
Facebook page.
Yes,
Okay.
I'll post it on the
And
Grumpod page too. So
you go to a sportscaster at WPTZ Channel 5
Rick
in
Whitlow,
Plattsburgh,
yes,
Rick Whitlow,
yep,
and then you go. Don McPherson is a huge baseball fan,
yes.
and Don's that wonderful deadpan. You know, I wish he played Lady of Spain more.
But Rick, I don't know if you noticed, Rick said "Our Lady of Spain."
Yes.
So I did it twice with Rick, and I said, "No, Rick, can you do it again? It's Lady of Spain." And he came back with "Our
I
Lady
think
of
Rick was
Spain."
born long after Lady of Spain first came into
But he was such a darling too. What a nice man. Apparently, he's on Facebook, and I'm going to contact him, see if he wants to join us for a chat here. That would be an
Oh, that'd be
absolute
great.
scream.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Anyway, for people who don't know, I think it was opening day 84, 85?
84, 84.
84.
Yeah,
And
I
you
believe.
did it. That who assigned you to do that?
Okay, that's another story too, because Vadnais, Yvon, was executive producer in those days, and I didn't even, I'd forgotten what Lady of Spain sounded like. The moment he heard the piece mentioned in the report, which he saw, he began to sing Lady of Spain in the hallway, and then everybody here heard him, and it was stuck in my brain for days thereafter.
So
Um,
Yvon assigned you?
no, Jim Duff.
Ah, well, okay.
Okay,
Now that makes more sense.
Duff used to do Jim Duff, we should get Jim Duff on here too, who is a journalist and goes way back, was on the assignment desk at the time. And he would get progressively, of course, Jim was born angry, but he would get progressively more angry as the days of the week went by.
He is what is known as a berserker. He's crazy.
And by Thursday or Friday, he'd be just fuming. So he'd turn to me and say, "Get out, do something funny." So I'd have to get out there and I'll put some of these pieces, and these are 36 years old. He'd say, "Get out, do this." So I'd get some sort of an idea, and that piece was shot and turned around in a matter of a couple of hours too. So it was all a lot of running around.
Go to your FB page and have a look. I'd forgotten about it. Really,
Oh,
I must have seen it somewhere.
I found other material yesterday. What I do when things get hairy in the news and things like that, I start to clean and I start to sort of rearrange. And I started going through my stuff yesterday, and I found a bunch of other stuff with George Athens too. And he was talking about popcorn when we spoke with him.
Yes. Well, he was eating popcorn on the air.
I found that clip, and I'll be posting that down
Excellent.
the line.
George will be thrilled. I think George wants to see that again.
But I'm so pleased that everybody who responded, we got a lot of responses from all kinds of folks, and I'm so pleased that it was able to sort of take you out of the present context a little bit, make you smile a little bit. So I'll have more for you in the coming days.
All righty. Do you want me to do some more, or you want to go right?
If you have something, we have Duke Eatmon in the green room here, and we might as well
share a couple of quick things. There's the great Myron. Look
Myron
at those jackets.
Florin. Yes.
My God, I'd love a jacket that color.
The accordion.
This is a guy who works in what are known as hospital radio stations in the United Kingdom. His name is Steve Colby.
Oh, yes.
He is the host of a program. I don't know if I told you about these. These are known as hospital radio stations. Not a bad little setup for a hospital radio station. It's not for PA. Well, it is for PA announcements, but they play music right throughout the hospital.
Wow.
To cheer people up. There are more than 200 of them. Steve works at a hospital in Nottingham, and it is a real tradition in British hospitals. Unfortunately, the song most requested these days in hospitals in the UK is My Way. And he says his job gets tough every now and then. This is out of an article. This is from an article from the New York Times. And these hospital radio stations started at Walter Reed Hospital, actually, in Washington, the Army Hospital in 1919. But pretty much now, they are a British phenomenon. And these guys play music, take requests, send best wishes to people.
Oh my.
And Steve says it's getting tougher these days because of a lot of the people, especially in ICU, what they're suffering from, and takes requests. And I thought it was just what a very English thing to do.
I
Very
recognize those speakers are tannoys too. Those are British-made speakers he's got on the wall there.
Which ones are you talking about? The mics?
The ones, the speakers up on the wall just above his head there.
Oh, the speakers there.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I figure he's got a pretty good setup there. And these guys, again, some of them were in radio. Some of them went on to radio. They would go on to BBC broadcasts and things like that. So it was kind of like starting in St. Mary's, Ontario. And
it reminds me of remember the early days of computers. WordPerfect was the leading word processing software back in the day. And the only way you could get support in those days was by telephone. So WordPerfect they were in Orem, Utah, had their own radio station that would play music to the people on hold. So they would have several hundred people waiting on hold, and they had a DJ doing a radio show for the people on hold at WordPerfect back in the day.
And of course, like our last days in radio, I didn't use CDs at all. It was all in a library, a virtual library they had.
And you didn't use a microphone on some days too. So
And we should say congratulations to Granddad.
Oh, good.
Talk to Andy.
Andy Millman.
He was about to be a granddad. So congratulations there, Zadie. Little Olivia Lay was born 2 days ago, and as Granddad admitted himself, he is a piece of mush, which is the way all grandparents become, and is completely bowled over by little Vivian Lee. So congratulations to Zadie and to Grandma. and to mom and dad, all, including the little girl, are well. And it's just a nice,
Mazel tov to Andy Noma and family. And Andy was on En Français on 98.5 with Mario Langlois a couple of weeks ago, talking about getting ball hockey, getting amateur hockey back on the rails here. He started a petition, apparently. So, and
good.
Andy is a multifaceted person. And speaking of multifaceted persons and talents, Duke Eatmon is going to join us in just a couple of seconds as we connect with him. And
morning, Duke. Morning. Oh, he's still connecting to his audio.
Just getting on there. Oh, the beard! I hadn't seen the beard.
Yeah, the beard. The
This
beard's
is
moving
new.
along there.
How old is the beard, Duke?
You look good.
About 2.5 months.
Oh boy. Okay. Is this a
My
pandemic beard?
Yeah, my barber won't let me touch my hair or beard. So when he opens in a couple of weeks, he'll have me looking civilized again. Hi, Yvonne. Hi, Dave.
How are you? Thanks for being
Actually,
patient.
I kind of like the look, Duke.
Yeah,
It looks
I
good.
like it. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
it scares me to death every time I look in the morning. I look at myself in the mirror. So.
It changes your look quite a bit because I'm accustomed to seeing you clean shaven and but I guess things
in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, okay.
In 2 weeks.
Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry we're a little late. We had a couple of technical glitches here, Duke, but my goodness, you know what? Let me just lead up with the story. About a week or two ago, I was listening to CBC Quebec City, and I heard Duke Eatmon set up Shining Star by Earth, Wind, and Fire. And I thought in typical CBC fashion, they're going to fade out of it and go to something else, but they let the entire tune play. I cranked it up in my office and I said, this is just a beautiful little moment of joy for me. And we got to contact Duke because there's so much to tell. Duke, I was looking for bio information about you and I couldn't find very much. Can you track us through that on how you came to be what you're doing now?
Well, I was a child of the 60s. I was born in 1969, right at the tail end. So my parents were 60s people. And I guess a lot of other people my age spent their time watching Sesame Street, Mr. Dress Up, and that sort of thing. And I did some of that, but most of my early childhood was spent going to concerts and going to see James Brown at the old Montreal Forum in the early 1970s.
Wish I could have seen that.
Going on stage with Chuck Berry at the Steel Pier Theater in Atlantic City when I was about 2 years of age. And so I came from a very musical family, both sides. And then I was a teenager. I started working as a musician in my late teens. And I got tired of not eating 3 times a day, although I could lose a few meals today. I got into radio in 1991 and realized that as an artist and a musician himself, I could probably, narrate and tell the story of music and curate in a way from a musician's perspective, musician's point of view. And with some of the interviews I've been doing over the last 30 years, I think it's somewhat worked out because I've been paid compliments by some of the biggest names in the business because when we would sit down and talk, music. I really didn't care who was dating who and who was having an affair with who and the scoop and the dirt on why the band broke up. I just wanted to get into the music. And I've been really successful since. I've run the gamut of the Montreal media outlets from CJD, Mix 96. I was program director at K103 in Ganawagi for a few years and hosted Street Sounds there, which was a drive home show. I actually began in Chateauguay because that's where there was an opening at their community station called CHAI. And I hosted R&B shows, country and western, classical, jazz, blues, done it all because I love all. I love
country
everything.
And western too?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, when I first began at K103, they had me doing the drive show, which was like R&B and hip hop. So I was scheduled to start in about 2 weeks, but then they lost the country host. So they said, could you start 2 weeks earlier and fill in for the country until your shift starts? Like, I said, sure, I love everything anyway.
Excellent.
Wait a minute, Duke, classical?
Oh yeah, big time. Love classical
Well,
music.
tell me about your classical bent. Who are your favorite? I mean, the usual, the bees, or what?
Vivaldi. I like the Bees. You know, the Brahms, the Bachs, and Beethovens.
The
But
bees.
I like the Bees. And James Brown said that he was the fourth bee in that trilogy. So,
And not, I wouldn't. That's not bad.
but I like Mozart. I like Vivaldi, and you know, it was classical music was something that was introduced to me via R&B, pop, rock and roll. When people like the Beatles would incorporate symphonic music, especially when they started experimenting around the time of Revolver and Sergeant Pepper, and Stevie Wonder would have orchestras in his music. And you're a teenager and you're learning about this, and then of course I played in the school band. You go back and see where that comes from, and it just absolutely fascinates me. And some of those composers would have been quite controversial today. I think we'd read about Mozart the way we read about Sid Vicious back in the day in the
Yeah.
1970s.
No, you're right. He was a
They
superstar.
they were quite
I
revolutionary.
think a lot of people who are, because I'm the generation older, I'd be your mom and dad's age, the people
Right.
who are real rock and roll lovers rarely realize that symphonic music was used by a lot of producers
Oh
in
yeah.
the 19. I'm just thinking of the entr'acte between what was that song? Oh, Darling, Be Home Soon.
Oh yeah.
And that song, and the middle of it is pure symphony.
Well, I think the story that probably really sold me on symphonic music was the story of the Beatles and the Day in the Life. And that ends Sergeant Pepper, and there's this big buildup that goes on for 16 bars, which is supposed to, in a way, sort of emulate the end of the world or the explosion of the 20th century. And the story of bringing in these guys in the London Symphony Orchestra for their scale pay, and then George Martin and Paul McCartney having explained to them for 16 bars, you're to play absolutely anything you want. Just make sure that the note you start off on is the same note that you end off on the next octave. And a lot of the musicians just walked out. They said, I didn't study in conservatories my entire life to go in there and play noise. But the ones that stayed, probably courtesy of the LSD that was slipped into their tea, did. And I just thought the story was just absolutely fascinating. And then that was just another style of music to add to my repertoire and study. And I think I think the first album I ever purchased, and it would have been through the Columbia Record of the Month Club. Remember Columbia House?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it was a collection of Mozart's, the Magic Flute and all that stuff. And then I saw Amadeus, and then I just became a classical fan also. So.
Are you? I mean, you've won awards, and when I mention your name to my spouse and others, oh, Duke Eatmon, I hear him all the time. You have a reputation as a storyteller, which is what charms people and what brings people in. My spouse is also saying, he's got a daughter who he's devoted to. You talk about your daughter, I think, once in a while here and there. So these things all come together to form a whole that is very comforting. Are you aware of the effect you're having on people who listen to you?
Sometimes people tell me these things, and it warms my heart, and it kind of is kind of a shock at times because I just do what I do, and I really, really appreciate the compliments and when people tell me, a story that you told, and it really touched me. But what was interesting is a friend of mine yesterday took me for a drive, and it's ironic that you bring that up now. And I wanted to go and visit every single home that I lived in this city, and when I was born, we were actually living in Tetraville, which is just before Pointe-aux-Trembles from the west side. And I remember every single home that I was in, except the house that I was born in because we left it when I was one. My parents were still both alive. My mother remembered the address. She gave it to me. We wazed it. We went down. And before I took pictures of me sitting on the stoop, I actually rang the doorbell of the people and asked them if it was okay with my mask on. And I didn't want to freak anybody out. And believe it or not, they invited us in, and I had never seen the home that I was born in because this was 1969. And there was something about going into that home. I've never seen it except in pictures, and those pictures were black and white, but I could smell something and sense something in there. And it's just amazing. We went from there, and this was on Desormeaux Street in Tetraville. We went to all the homes, and everywhere that I went, aside from remembering my family and whatnot, all I remember was musical stories. And it was always music, except the first home because I was too young. Then we went to my second home. I remember the music that was around during that time. I remember the concerts that I went to. And so when I think of music, there's always a story that goes with it. And I think I probably get a lot of that from my father, because when my father would tell me about things, he wouldn't just say, okay, here's this song and this is what it's about. He would give me the stories behind it. And I remember as a child, it fascinated me. And I don't know if I ever meant to fascinate anyone, but you know, you're a creature of habit. So since that's the way my father told the stories, that's the way I would tell the stories. And I just love it when people say they get something from it or they're touched by it. But it's the only way that I know how to tell that story. Just like when I was explaining to you the whole Beatles story right now with A Day in the Life from Sergeant Pepper, you know, seeing this in a documentary, I think of that song and I think of the story behind it. And I think it's important because the great Chuck D, who I've been doing so many projects with for about 25 years from Public Enemy, he said, art will always be around. Artists will always make art. It's as natural as breathing. But he said, we need people to curate it so that people can understand the art and not love it more, but get a deeper appreciation for it in understanding where it comes from and the ideas behind it. And that's always made things more fascinating to me. James Brown and Bob Dylan did great music, but until you understand where they came from and how Bob Dylan became Bob Dylan and how James Brown became James Brown or Aretha Franklin or Prince or whoever it is, you're getting great music, but you're not getting the appreciation and fascination when you find out what they had to do to get there and what led them there. So that's what
That
I try
sense
to
of
do.
nostalgia, Duke, when you stepped into those homes, which were your homes,
Yeah.
must have been also almost a piercing of your heart. It sounds wonderful, but it sounds really, really intense too, because there's nothing like smells and sights.
Yesterday, the first home, like I said, I've only seen pictures of it, and you're literally talking a picture of my mother holding me when I was an infant, black and white pictures from 1969. So I certainly didn't remember that. I got that sense. But when I went to my second home and I went inside, yeah, I had tears streaming down my face. Um, the neighborhood convenience store was maybe about 200 feet away. I remember as a child, it felt like it was a mile away. And walking to it to go buy candy, I kept looking back at my family just to see if I could still see them. And yet I look at it, I'm like, wow, that's like 200 feet. It seemed like a mile. And then there was a shopping mall maybe about 10 minutes away on Notre Dame. And my uncle had a recording studio there. And it was there that I would see musicians going in and out. And when I say recording studio, a lot of people today think of someone's bedroom. I'm talking about a recording studio where there's a master control with a console with 16 tracks, and then a 2-track machine, and then a drum booth, and then a vocal booth, and then a performance area for guitars and keyboards and whatnot. And it was a very, very emotional experience. I remember then going to Carrie Street, which was in Montreal's East End. And I remember we were going to see James Brown at the Montreal Forum. This was the Revolution of the Mind tour, 1973. And I'm like 4 years old. And I remember looking at the album cover. And on the album cover, he had a denim suit on with no shirt underneath. And my parents had a denim suit for me to wear to go to the concert. Except this was March, and they wanted me to put a turtleneck underneath and a winter coat. And I remember not just being told a story, but I actually remember having a fit and not wanting to go. Because this is not the way James was.
No, this is not
dressed
the way
on
it
the
was going
cover.
to be. Yeah.
And so my parents, my parents got me by saying, you can put it on, you put this on, it's winter, and when you get there, you can take it all off and perform for the people. But you laugh, but we were actually center stage, 5th row, and I spent the entire night in the aisle dancing and singing all the words to Soul Power, Get Up, Get Into It, Get Involved, Cold Sweat. And this part I don't remember, but my parents remember people fascinated by James. I mean, a James Brown concert is not a concert. It's like a religious experience. It's people jumping on seats, getting arrested in the aisles, watching him and watching this 3-4-year-old singing every song like he knew them. But that was the experience. It wasn't just, hey, that's a great groove. It was just getting lost in the music.
You must really miss going to concerts these days. What's going on?
I'm going to be honest with you. I just miss everyday life. But concerts for me died when Prince Rogers Nelson died in 2016. And I've been to a few concerts since, but having seen Prince, who is a amalgamation of James Brown, Sly and the Family Stone, Elvis Presley, Jimi Hendrix, War, Santana, Al Green, all in one. And being at Metropolis during the Jazz Festival, where he came on stage at midnight and left at 4 o'clock in the morning without an intermission, only because the police said he had to leave. It's hard to go to a show and be touched in that same way. So although I've seen many, I think Prince was sort of the combination of all that stuff. And I would still go to concerts today. But after he left us, I said, we will never have another man grace that stage the way he did. If we do, it won't be in my lifetime.
Wow. Duke, we need you more than ever.
Thank you.
Keep doing what you're doing, and we can hear you on CBC Radio on a regular basis. And wow, again, that sort of set a little flame in my little bod the other day, and I know it's part of the many lives of the many people around me too. So thank you for what you do, buddy.
Hey,
Before
more
I
stories
go,
another
I want to
time,
thank
Duke. We'd love to have you back.
Yep.
I would love to come back. Guys, I want to leave you with this, Dave. I remember your last couple of years at CBC. You were always very busy. I was coming in and out. You always took a few minutes to ask me how I was doing and whatnot. So I really appreciate that. That was your last days of Daybreak. Yvonne, I've been a fan of yours since my teenage years when you were doing CBC News, and you actually made us want to watch the news because you made it fun. You made it interesting. You made it funky. Yes, you made the news funky. Yes.
Okay, well that changes my life right there.
Duke,
and I remember the very first
guy on 2 feet.
Very first record you ever bought. I believe Yvonne's first 45 was Green Onions by Booker T and the MGs. And why do I remember? Because I remember him telling the story to Peter Anthony Holder on television or the radio.
Yep.
And again, it's not just a song, it's the way you described it and going down and buying it. And whenever I think of you, I think of all the great funky music from Stax during that day. And yes, believe it or not, I remember your first 45 was Booker T and the MGs.
79 cents I paid for it. And I remember that. And the
Good
second
choice.
one I bought was
it was Memphis Soul Stew.
Memphis Soul Stew. My God, how do you remember that?
Because when you tell that story, it becomes my story.
Wow.
And I remember, and I think of Yvonne Uno, and I think of that story. When I think of you, I think not only all your years with, CBC News, but then I think of the music. And I realized, man, he was into the soul music and funk music and whatnot.
I was a huge soul fan from, and I was, back in those days, you weren't even born. I was about 11 years old, 12 years old. Yeah, that's...
And what was the label out of Chicago? You mentioned Stax, but wasn't there Chess?
There was
Chess Records. There was Chess Records and VJ out of Chicago, Motown out of Detroit, Stax out of Memphis. And that was a day where there was like 300 independent record labels, and they were all putting out great music.
I always thought the Chicago sound from Chess and that was what had a bit more of an edge to it, even more than Motown.
Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, that was Chess Records. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Guys, thank you so much.
King Curtis did Memphis Soul Stew. I think I
sir.
played it so many times I wore it out.
Lady of Spain.
Lady of Spain is how we're going to
I love it.
Checking my...
Hey, Duke, this has been more than fun, pal. This has been great.
Duke, you are a gem. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you.
We'll have
all
you
the
back
best, guys.
Soon. Bye. Duke Eatmon, how can you follow that? Of course, when you look up funky in the dictionary, you see my picture. Yeah.
Booker T and the
Me
Memphis
and James
group.
Brown is, but you look up funky in the
yeah, you with a denim suit on, but a cardigan under.
That's right. Me with a cardigan and a pipe, with my arm around James Brown. Wow, he's one guy I never saw in concert. I never got to see him. I remember James Brown. Remember Katie Malik interviewing him, I believe the last time he was in Montreal. And he was already getting on in years then. And I was not able to make it to the show. And he was beginning to lose a bit of his grip at the time. But man, what a showman. Oh. Yeah,
well, when Duke mentions James Brown and Berry, Chuck Berry in the same, Chuck Berry is such a seminal character in the world of rock and roll. He is one of the founders, and
Man.
I listen to his stuff now, you know, and it's not nostalgia. It's just still great, great music.
All right, then. That was a lot of fun. Tomorrow,
That was a lot of fun.
Robert N. Wilkins. Can you tell us about whom he is?
Yeah, he was a high school teacher for many, many years and an amateur historian. And his bailiwick is really Edwardian Montreal, which would start from 1901 to about 1910, because Edward VII didn't live all that long because of the longevity of his mother, Victoria. But he's written two books, one 1909, and his more recent is 1906. And it's a slice of life in Montreal in those particular
Wow.
years. And it's also shows up the great differences, but the similarities of a large city. I mean, Montreal in 1906 was only 300,000 people, but it had all the characteristics of a big North American Edwardian city, but still, and it is true, it's a cliche, but a lot of cliches are true, very European in flavor.
The historian
and with
in
all the
you
problems attendant to that.
manifests itself again. I'll be learning way more stuff again tomorrow, thanks to you. So Robert
Well, Robert
N.
also
Wilkins.
goes all around town and takes pictures then and now. Like he's got pictures from 1899 and then 1945, what they've done to row houses. Some of them beautifully redone, some of them abominations. But he really knows his stuff. So I'd be like to delve into pre-First World War
So we will
Montreal.
speak with him tomorrow. Okay, very good.
Okay.
À demain.